Next we have Sophie Benbow from Fauna and Flora International.
Everybody gets it the wrong way around. Lovely. Thank you very much. Great. I hope everyone's coffee is still powering through. So my name is Sophie Benbow. I'm currently the head of marine at Fauna and Flora International. We are a very large international biodiversity conservation organisation. But obviously, do I need to point it here? There we go. So I did the Conservation Masters back in 2005, as far as I can remember. And I've always been passionate about the ocean, so I'm always happy to talk about that. And so I found a way to feature the marine stuff in the Masters by developing a dissertation looking at cetacean distribution abundance around the Moray Firth. And that for me was really the catalyst of figuring out where I want to go next. So having done the Masters, I applied for an internship with an organisation called Blue Ventures. So at that time they were a relatively small marine conservation focused organisation only working in Madagascar. So I interned in the London office and was very fortunate that after a couple of months I ended up in Madagascar, a really wonderful place to be, not great roads to get there, but a really fantastic place to spend quite a few years, pretty much from my side living the dream, living in a hut on the beach, diving every day, training volunteers, and really embracing and being part of those communities. And I also kind of fell in love with the humble octopus. So Blue Ventures have done a lot of work on sustainable management of octopus fisheries. They're really well adapted to short-term fisheries closures, and that's the whole premise of the success and the kind of spread of conservation in southwest Madagascar. So it's a really simple fishery. Anybody can do it. They simply walk out on the reef flat at low tide and find the octopus hidden there. That's the collection truck, so that's how the octopus is exported. An octopus that this lady catches that's transported in this truck ends up in supermarkets in Spain. So it's one of those kind of global supply chains that is so important to the communities in Madagascar. And with some relatively simple conservation management measures, we can increase the productivity for the local fishers, we can increase the value, the money that they're receiving from that fishery, and we can ensure that the whole system remains sustainable. This is one of the opening days, so these short-term 2 to 3 month closures, and then on the opening day the fishers go out, they have a massive boom, they catch a couple of tons of octopus in a single day using spears. It's quite a phenomenal experience to see. And then there's obviously a lot of data collection and science going along with that, so I was able to publish a few papers that document how successful these closures are and how the sustainability of the fisheries has now catalysed broader conservation, so there's now permanent closures that the communities are fully bought into. So it's been a really nice catalyst to engage communities and then result in stronger, longer-term conservation measures. I just put this in, so this was Cyclone Funzo, which was back in 2015, just as an example of also how vulnerable these communities are. And a couple of speakers have mentioned it already, but just the need to engage on conservation issues holistically and consider that these people are so incredibly vulnerable to the impact of these storm events, and they are happening more and more often. When I first went to Madagascar, they hadn't had a storm in a very long time, and by the time I left, we'd had 2 or 3 large storms. The riverbanks in the city that I was living in had breached and half the town had flooded, so it was really obvious that climate for these communities is something that needs to be considered more holistically as we engage on conservation, development, and any other kind of introduced measures. So after 5 years in Madagascar, I moved to FFI, Fauna and Flora International, based in Cambridge. Bit of a culture shock after a long time, by the coast of Madagascar to a small city, but a really fantastic organisation. I was very fortunate, so I entered on a maternity cover role, which I think is quite a top tip for people trying to break into conservation. It's obviously not a reliable long-term role, but if the organisation likes you and you perform well, quite often it evolves into a longer-term opportunity, and that was what happened for me. So I started off managing the Asia Pacific programme, engaging in Myanmar, Cambodia, Indonesia, supporting some dive training of local, these are actually government staff and FFI staff in Myanmar, so helping to empower and engender and just integrate conservation into everything that's going on in those communities. Just a little bit about FFI in general, because I don't know how familiar people are with the work of FFI, and in particular that we have quite a well-established marine programme. So we have 3 key aims. We want to secure effective site-based protection, so marine protected areas under whichever name or acronym is appropriate to the local context, starting with community-based closures, but also engaging with government on top-down closures, where there's a need and a niche that we can add value to. We also seek to improve policy and practice, so recognising that in order for MPAs to be effectively managed, there needs to be the right legislation, the right regulations in place, and it needs to be enforceable. But also then letting us tackle some of the broader, more holistic threats to ocean health, so marine plastic pollution, oil and gas extraction, deep sea mining, destructive fishing, and also thinking about a focus on sustainability, so trying to build in, I've just noticed the slides are up there as well, that's handy. So building in sustainable financing mechanisms into some of the conservation work. And I think a couple of other speakers have also mentioned it, that as you do a master's in conservation, but you have to be more than that. You have to be an economist, you have to be a political strategist, you have to be a small business development manager in order that all of those things can progress. And then thirdly, FFI has a really strong focus on capacity building. So we don't go into a country and seek to set up our own country program. We would always look to identify an appropriate local partner. So if it's a smaller NGO, a national NGO, it could be a fishing cooperative, it could be an academic institution, a local government partner, an MPA manager, whatever the need is, whoever is the most appropriate local actor. And then we can do some capacity needs assessments with them to understand what they need to be better placed to deliver marine conservation over the longer term. So we're currently active across 17 countries around the world, and in my role as head of marine, that's what I do. So I have general oversight of the global marine portfolio, supporting our teams on the ground and in Cambridge to deliver conservation in the most effective way through our partners and our staff. Just to press the MPA point and kind of link into some of the global targets. So back in around 2005, collectively the world decided to aim for 10% protection by 2012. We still haven't reached it. We're only at 7%, and only less than 3% of that is fully protected. Obviously, there's big arguments and debates around protection, but there is generally still a very long way to go. So then the other thing that I was asked to do for this talk was to think about some reasons for conservation success and some kind of learning from what I've done so far in my career. So I've got 3 that I wanted to just flag to you guys. The first one, that it needs to be embedded in local action. So you need to engage communities, you need them to be supportive, you need to consult them, you need to be there on the ground. And that's FFI's approach, that we would look for a local partner that can do that. So rather than being the kind of parachute conservationist coming in, doing your bit and leaving, you can empower and build the capacity and the structure of the local organisations that can then take it forward. And then innovation. So I think the first speaker was talking about tech and AI and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. In terms of the MPA patrols and enforcement, I think that's a route that's going to have to be gone down, particularly as we start talking about more high seas protection. There's no way to enforce and patrol those without some kind of satellite tech, AI systems to ensure that we can then support governments to actually enforce those areas rather than being paper parks. And the other thing I just wanted to flag on innovation was linking back to sustainable financing. So obviously blue carbon is becoming very trendy in the world. There's lots of people talking about it, from seagrass, mangroves, salt marsh, all the other kind of critical coastal ecosystems. Also thinking about tourism levies and sustainable financing mechanisms that can be generated like that. Obviously COVID was not productive with that moving forward in the last 2 years, but it is a route that a lot of projects do look to. And then this picture on the right is a pufferfish from Turkey, a frozen pufferfish from the lab. So this is an invasive species from the Red Sea. It's come through the Suez Canal And as the temperature in the Eastern Mediterranean is heating up, it's now effectively evolving into a mini Red Sea. So these are a carnivorous predatory fish. There's no other predators for it in the Eastern Med, so they're just absolutely booming. They're incredibly toxic, and there's a company in North America that is looking to harness and process that toxin as a pain-relieving drug. So there's a potential really innovative, creative mechanism for sustainable financing there, if you can find a way to create a market for this fish and then get the profits going back into conservation. And then my final one around taking restorative measures. So whenever you're thinking about conservation, whenever you're engaging in a site, just make sure that what you're doing, protection is fantastic. Obviously, you protect what's there because that's the most biodiverse thing. But when you're moving forward and trying to create solutions, make sure it's with a restorative mindset on, particularly thinking about things like aquaculture. So the global shift towards aquaculture as a solution, I have reservations around that, but I won't go into them. But if we can focus on the lower trophic level species, think about mussels and oysters and things like that, then there's broader biodiversity benefits that can come from that. And looking to the future, this is the island of Principe, Santa Maria and Principe in the Gulf of Guinea. Really wonderful kind of Jurassic Park landscape. So I think my take home, and I think a few people have also mentioned it, is the need to be collaborative. We need to engage holistically on all these conservation challenges. The world is at risk and we cannot solve it in silos. We need to come together and we need to think and create collective solutions. And then the little Word document there was just to frame it as a policy thing, that there are several key marine-focused policy opportunities coming up this year. 2022 has been billed the Ocean Super Year, delayed from 2020 for the pandemic. So there are a number of key moments happening. So there was the UN Environment Assembly in March that committed to the Global Plastics Treaty. There's UN Oceans Conference in June, which is trying to bring together science and policymakers. There is the subsidy debate at the World Trade Organization to finally, hopefully, remove or reduce harmful fishing subsidies, which could potentially drastically change the whole fishing industry. The BBNJ debate, so the areas beyond national jurisdiction, and the High Seas Treaty, so we manage much more of our ocean space. The ISA is the International Seabed Authority, so they have the mandate to grant licenses for deep sea mining, which is incredibly worrying. And then the last one is the climate COP, so COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in November. So obviously the Glasgow COP got a lot of press coverage. It was really well publicised, and marine and ocean has gradually got a little bit of a shout out, but I think there's a lot more scope to really show the power of the ocean in solving some of the climate crisis. And that's it, I think.